Okay, so everyone's talking about El Nino, and I'll go through that different scenarios. But there are other what we call teleconnections, which is a climatic staple of weather, sometimes thousands of miles away, up in the stratosphere, 10, 20 miles, or sea surface temperatures in Indonesia, 1,000 miles away can affect the weather for Brazil, coffee, really any commodity. Some of the keys other than El Nino is what is the Antarctic oscillation going to be?
Hmm.
A negative AAO is similar to the negative AO in the northern hemisphere that brings about cold winters, right? A block over the Arctic Circle in January or February brings cold air down to the Midwest and East, creates a spike in heating oil, natural gas sometimes. When you have warming in red, like we do right now, a negative AAO, that tends to increase potential dryness in parts of Brazil in September and October if it continues.
Hmm.
Let me just go through all this. We also have something called the Indian dipole. Okay. And if you notice, when the Indian dipole is positive, you tend to have dry weather, not all the time, in Brazil there in October.
Hmm.
And I'll go through that again in a second. When you have a combination of these teleconnections, a negative AAO index, an Indian dipole, which is actually there on your screen there, cool over Indonesia, warm over the east of Africa. You have the warm tropical Atlantic, resulting in all these hurricanes. Most of them are pretty weak, except for that one in Florida because of El Nino. You have all these events going on at the same time. You tend to have this going into September and October. Look at that. Those were El Nino events with a Indian dipole. Again, going back here for a minute, the temperature pattern over Indonesia being cool and warm off the coast of Africa, a tropical record warm Atlantic, right? This tends to create hot weather in Brazil in September and October, and also tends to create, look at that, dryness. So there are a lot of El Ninos that really have decent weather for Brazil, particularly, in southern Minas down to Paraná and Sao Paulo.
Right.
Typically with El Ninos, I think it's further north in the Robusta areas that tend to have some problems, and also Indonesia, certainly, which could happen next spring, and in Vietnam, maybe next summer. But when you have strong El Nino events, which it looks like we're going to have 1997, 2015, 16, there tends to be hotter, drier than normal weather 2/3 of the time. And when you combine that with that warm negative AAO index over Antarctica and the situation with the Indian dipole there, right? You tend to have drier than normal weather. So that is my concern right now, and why I think it's possible coffee prices could actually bottom for a while, even though the Brazil real is, well, Brazil's been in the tank. I guess it's really a little bit, but the dollar's been strengthening, and if
Yeah.
all this harvest pressure, I think that will probably begin to not be a factor any longer, and they'll begin to shift their attention on the weather here for the next couple months.